Hey guys, I'm going to do a video real quick, this one for the main card of UFC 290. We've got some great fights coming up this weekend, and I'm going to get right on into it. Starting off with Bo Nickal against Tresean Gore. Tresean Gore was the first Ultimate Fighter season winner in quite a few years since they stopped doing the show. It was the very first season that they brought the show back for. And along the way throughout not only that show, but also his career so far inside of the UFC, he's shown that he can do it all. He can grapple, he can strike, everything. He's got power in his hands. He is a really well-rounded and complete fighter. However, his opponent just so happens to be Bo Nickal, a man with tremendous wrestling accolades, and really, well, from what we've seen, he's undefeated so far, 4-0, and we've seen him just be able to really wrestle every single one of his opponents to a victory, and I'm talking a very quick victory. I mean, this guy is doing the same thing that a lot of people expected Khamzat Chimaev to be able to do throughout his entire career. Except I would even argue that he's doing it better than Chimaev did. And I say better as in more technical and more efficient. It's not really quite as wild or crazy as it is whenever you see Khamzat Chimaev do it. And from what I've seen from Tresean Gore, I haven't really seen that same ability in him. Whether it's in terms of his wrestling or his striking or his power, you know, he's very well-rounded, he's very complete, but it doesn't seem like he has any tools or skills that can stand out enough to get a win over Bo Nickal. So for this one, I've got Bo Nickal. And for the next one, we've got Jalen Turner against Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker's coming off of a win in his last fight against Claudio Puelles, and he was on his way to getting a lightweight title shot, had it not been for him fighting Dustin Poirier. And then, you know, from there, he seems to have only been losing to the best of the best, such as Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, Islam Makhachev, and Arnold Allen. But aside from those guys, as of late, he has been able to beat just about anyone else that's put in front of him. And on top of that, I think Dan Hooker's going to have a striking advantage in this fight. He's shown that he has grit, heart, and determination to keep coming forward and trying to execute his game plan regardless of the adversity that stands in front of him. Whether he's getting banged up on the feet or out grappled on the ground, he has a never say die type of attitude, and I think that's going to greatly help him in this fight. Now, Jalen Turner has lost his last fight to Mateusz Gamrot, and before that, he was on a 4-fight win streak though. And Jalen Turner has shown to be one of the underrated prospects in his division so far from what I can see. You know, he's got great grappling, he's well-rounded, he can strike, he can do it all. And he may have the grappling advantage here, but Dan has really good takedown defense, and we saw that on display in his last fight. And as far as I'm concerned, Jalen Turner just hasn't seemed to be able to break into that really elite level fighter at the lightweight division. At least not yet, and there's always potential that he could get there someday, but I'm not sure if he'll be able to do that against Dan Hooker. I'm taking Dan Hooker in this fight. Now the next fight, very interesting, kind of weird that they made this fight, considering that there is a little bit of a rivalry going on between Israel Adesanya and Dricus du Plessis. But Dricus du Plessis is going into a fight that really does not suit him, because in this fight he is facing Robert the Reaper Whittaker. And if you know Robert Whittaker, you know this man is the best guy in the middleweight division outside of Israel Adesanya. And I think you can make a pretty logical argument that Whittaker beats Alex Pereira if they fight. But aside from that, Robert Whittaker has been able to beat absolutely anybody and everybody that has been put in front of him outside of Israel Adesanya. Israel Adesanya is the only guy who has been able to beat Robert Whittaker, and he did it twice. Honestly, it really seems like Robert Whittaker has a very good case to get a trilogy fight with Israel Adesanya, especially if he beats Dricus du Plessis in this fight. I mean, Robert Whittaker really is truly great everywhere. When I think of Robert Whittaker, I think of the definition of well-rounded. I mean, at this point in his career, Robert Whittaker has gone from being mainly a striker to being a guy who can literally do absolutely everything to the most elite level possible. Whether you're talking about striking, the grappling, the takedown defense, in the clinch, cardio, anything at all, anything you think of, Robert Whittaker can do it to a very high standard that is so much higher than just about anyone else in MMA entirely, and especially higher than anyone else in his division. And that's why this is a terrible fight for Dricus du Plessis to have, because every single fight we've seen Dricus in, he has had struggle, he has had problems, and he's been hurt. And a lot of it stems from the lack of a gas tank that Dricus has. Because Dricus du Plessis, in every single fight I've seen him in, he gasses super quick. He goes out there, balls to the wall, ready to finish, and he does rely on getting the finish early because of the lack of a gas tank. I mean, every single fight I've seen of his, he gasses within the first round. And if it gets to the second round, he is dog shit tired going into the second round every time. And a lot of that could be contributed to the fact that he runs such a high pace in his fights in terms of the offense. He comes forward, he's not willing to take a back step unless he gets hurt. And every time he gets hurt, he shoots for a takedown more often than not. And Robert Whittaker has absolutely excellent takedown defense. And to be as brutally honest as I possibly can, Dricus is going to get pieced the fuck up in this fight. I mean, if Robert chooses to take him out of the first round, even out of the first round, Dricus is going to collapse. He's going to fail in every way imaginable. Robert, I think, is a much better striker. He's a much better grappler. He's just better in every single sense of MMA. And so for this one, I think this is the biggest lock on the card. I'm taking Robert Whittaker. And now moving on from the biggest lock on the card to what is, in my opinion, the closest fight on the card. We've got the co-main event with Brandon Moreno defending his flyweight title against Alessandro Pantoja. And I'm going to start off with Pantoja because he's a guy who's already beaten Brandon Moreno once back in 2018 by decision. And it was a very closely contested fight, and he managed to get the decision win in that fight. However, the only bad thing about that fight is it was about 5 years ago. So much has changed, not only in the UFC, not only in the flyweight division, but about both of these fighters. Pantoja's on a 3-fight win streak, and from what I've seen, he's very well-rounded. He's pretty much just like Brandon Moreno. He can do it all, from the striking to the grappling, just about everywhere in the game. Now, I think he will probably have a slight grappling advantage. And I want to put emphasis on that word slightly because, like I said, these guys are very much alike. With 8 knockouts, 10 subs, and 7 decisions in his career, he's shown that he can go the distance, he can get knockouts, he can get subs. He will be a submission threat if the fight goes to the ground, and I would imagine that both of these guys have gotten only better in the time that they've had since their last fight. And both of these guys do put on a high pace, as is normally expected with flyweight fights. But Brandon Moreno, just like Pantoja, can do it all. Whether it's striking, wrestling, anything you can think of, he can do it. But Brandon Moreno has had much more adversity throughout his career as opposed to Alessandro Pantoja. From being cut from the UFC, to coming back, to winning the belt, to participating in the first ever quadrilogy fight against a guy in Deiveson Figueiredo, who a lot of people thought was going to dominate the flyweight division for years to come. And Brandon Moreno came in and shook that belief from everybody. He was the first ever Mexican-born champion, and this fight really is such a close fight to pick from. I think it's the closest fight on the card, and I'm probably most excited for this one. With 2 wins in a row, this will be his first flyweight title defense since winning the title back. And I gotta say that for this one, my heart truly does tell me to go with Brandon Moreno in this fight. So for this fight, I will be taking Brandon Moreno. And now for the main event of UFC 290, we've got Alexander Volkanovski defending the featherweight title against Yair Rodriguez. Now Rodriguez is a striker for the most part. He's on a 2-fight win streak, and this is his first title fight for the actual featherweight title. And if he wins this fight against Volkanovski, this will make him the 3rd Mexican-born champion in the history of the UFC. And while Yair Rodriguez is a very unorthodox fighter, I think Volkanovski has everything it takes to shut him down come UFC 290. Because just like Robert Whittaker, Volkanovski can do it all. And he's really surprised people with the amount of improvement that he's shown in his striking. Coming from a guy who used to kind of tend to wrestle a bit more and want to dominate in that type of way. Going on a 12-fight win streak throughout his entire run in the UFC, only taking his first loss inside the UFC to Islam Makhachev in a fight where some people did think Volk won. This will be Alexander Volkanovski's 5th title defense, and if he's successful, this will definitely put him in the conversation for the greatest featherweight of all time. And it's very hard to find any weaknesses in Volkanovski's way of fighting. However, when you look at Yair Rodriguez, Yair has a big weakness in this fight to Volk when it comes to being on the ground. I mean, back in 2017, Yair Rodriguez took his first loss inside the UFC to Frankie Edgar, and Frankie Edgar used a more wrestling, grappling type of approach to beat Yair Rodriguez. And while it was a doctor stoppage due to his eye swelling up so much that he couldn't see out of it, Frankie showed dominance in that fight through being able to out-wrestle and use ground and pound to beat Yair Rodriguez. And I think if Frankie Edgar at that stage in his career can do it, Volkanovski damn sure can. And on top of that, Yair's last loss was to Max Holloway, a guy who Volkanovski has beaten 3 times already, including the last time being he outstruck Max for most of the fight. And that's exactly how Max beat Yair. He outstruck Yair And while Yair is a very unorthodox and tricky, unpredictable type of striker, I don't think it will be enough to overcome a guy like Alexander Volkanovski, a man who has been so dominant in his title reign so far inside the UFC that he is now being considered as one of the greatest to ever do it. So for this fight, I will be taking Alexander Volkanovski. And to recap, I'm going to take Bo Nickal, Dan Hooker, Robert Whitaker, Brandon Moreno, and Alexander Volkanovski. And it looks like that's all I got for y'all. So hit like, subscribe, and all that.